Secretary Clinton, what an honor to welcome you here at the 92nd Street Y. Congratulations on your book and for joining us here. Nothing's going on, so I don't know how we're going to fill an hour.
Well, first of all, Margaret, thank you so much for being here. And in the wings is Margaret's 10-year-old son, Jack, who we are thrilled to have with us as well. And I am always happy to be at the 92nd Street Y. And so if you've watched Margaret's show, which I highly recommend, I find it so well done. We do have a lot of ground to cover, so we should just jump right in.
When we last spoke, I had the privilege of speaking to you in September at the Clinton Global Initiatives conference, and your book had just come out. You begin your book, of course, the campaign was still going on. You begin your book and you mention in your book twice the Greek woman Cassandra, who had the curse of being able to predict the future. Actually, that was her blessing. Her curse was that no one believed her. And you have often felt likened to Cassandra, that you have sort of warned about what is going to happen in the future, and yet nobody has taken heed. So that was in September. That was before the election ended up in the way that it did, as definitively as it did, with Donald Trump winning every single swing state, 312 electoral votes, some of the largest margins for Republicans in blue states, like even here in Manhattan since Ronald Reagan's re-election. How do you reflect on this moment, Cassandra?
Well, yeah, just call me Cassie. I do reference that in the book because, the myth of Cassandra and the idea that, occasionally we hear things that we find so fundamentally hard to believe. I mean, I'm in that category. People say things like, oh, that could never happen, but having been a close observer now for quite a number of years of our current president, you have to suspend your disbelief. And you have to do two things simultaneously. You have to both listen to what he says, because he often telegraphs what he's going to do, and you have to pay attention to the people who have his ear, because he often will listen to them. So if they say, Project 2025, which he claimed to know nothing about, if they say, here's what we want to see in the first 100 days, in the first year, and whatever of a potential next term, you have to pay attention. And I think now everybody understands that we have a huge set of new, unprecedented challenges coming out of this administration, some of which even I would have been surprised by if somebody had said to me a few months ago that's going to happen.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to ask. I mean, Cassie, did you predict that he would have 100 days in granted clemency to all of those January 6th, everybody who had been charged with a crime in connection to January 6th charge on the road? Maybe you would have predicted that. He telegraphed that. He said that. Little things like taking away the Secret Service protection of General Milley and Secretary Pompeo and Anthony Fauci, and basically, gutting USAID, the Department of Education, Radio Free Europe, Voice of America, Tariff-mageddon, right? So of all the things that have been surprising to many people, what has surprised you the most?
I think that the recklessness, the cruelty, the chaos has exceeded even my worst assessments. It's so painful. People say to me, well, aren't you just angry? I said, yeah, of course I am. I'm outraged, I'm angry, I'm worried about our country. But I'm also so profoundly sad at the wrecking ball that's being taken to people's lives, to the rule of law and due process, to the way that our government is supposed to function, separation of powers, checks and balances, all of that. Now, I want to hasten to add, because we have a lot we can talk about with the damage that is being done, I do think the tide is beginning to turn. I think that people are seeing what was very hard to imagine or believe. So I do think that there is a growing awareness among the American public that the economy is being cratered. It contracted in this last quarter. The unpredictability that he has injected into the global economy is going to have far-reaching impact on people's standard of living, on the cost of things. Remember, the affordability issue is so critically important to the election. It still is to so many people. So the real world consequences are beginning to be seen and felt. And I think that's why his, approval rating has fallen, considerably, and people are beginning to, express their deep concerns about the direction he's leading the country.
That's certainly bearing out in the polling, with 52% of Americans who agree with the statement that, quote, Trump is, quote, a dangerous dictator whose power should be limited before he destroys American democracy.
But Margaret, if you look at those numbers, and I occasionally do, just to see what's going on, if you look at those numbers, obviously, they are largely Democrats and independents. The Democratic, disapproval is, in the, I guess, 90% range. Independents are also, in the high 50s, disapproving. But the Republicans are sticking with him. And it's so, having served in the Senate for 8 years, having been Secretary of State and working with so many of the Republican members of Congress, particularly in the Senate, who are still there, it just is astonishing to me how they are not speaking up, how they are not opposing what he's doing. And Lisa Murkowski, who is someone that I count as a great former colleague who I think has enormous courage, expressed something that I don't think we'd ever thought we would hear in the United States. Why are they not speaking out? Because they're afraid. They are scared. And they're scared because they and their families are getting threatened. You talk to a lot of people on the Republican side. You know that. You hear that. My good friend Cory Booker, who did a fabulous job with his 25-hour speech. I called to tell him how proud I was of him. And we were talking. He said, it's so sad to me, he said, because I talk to my Republican colleagues, and they all tell me the same thing. They don't agree with him. They are incredibly worried about what he's doing to the country, but they are scared to speak out.
Are you beginning, you say the tide is beginning to turn. Even on the Republican side, look, I'm always very Pollyannish and a glass half full. I was delighted to see Tom Cole, the chair of the Appropriations Committee in the House, start to speak up and actually directly point out the OMB director and point out his behavior that perhaps is extra constitutional. Do you think it's a matter of time as the numbers break apart from Trump, as the damage begins to be done, then the political will and courage may emerge?
I hope so. Right now, I see very few signs, except for somebody
Chuck
like
Grassley.
Lisa Murkowski, and Rand Paul, who has, hard to agree with him on a lot of things, except he's right on, his current, argument against Trump's economic policies, tariffs, and the way that they're being implemented and what it means. The thing that bothers me is that I don't see that increasing. I see a few lone voices out there. And the House, which is so gerrymandered that it is very difficult to understand what's going on with a lot of the members of the Republican majority there. But I really feel that the numbers are going to finally break through to them, because I think if the election were held next Tuesday or tomorrow, we would win back the House. We would win back the House based on what has happened up to now. But it's my great fear that they are going to keep going. They're going to try to pass this absurd tax cut that is going to blow. Here we are with our economy contracting, with people, dumping treasuries, with the dollar falling, with our markets being cut off, container ships are not even loaded, and they're going to try to pass a tax cut that will increase the cost of servicing our debt by such an extraordinary amount that it could have the most devastating effect on real economic activity. And because it will crowd out all other kinds of capital investments. So if they go forward with that, which it seems that they are determined to do, and they want to pretend that they're paying for it, which they are not, then they have to cut Medicaid. They have to try to figure out how to fool around with Social Security more. I mean, I really think their goal with Social Security was to make it so difficult for people to interact with the Social Security Administration and to slow down the delivery of checks that they would actually claim they were saving money because checks weren't going out. They're playing all of these games with people's lives and with the future of our economic, potential as a nation. So honestly, I think that it would be, the people I know who are still there, they would never vote in the way that they're voting, but we'll see whether they have any conscience or any courage or any common sense.
You talk about in the book, and we talked about this previously, you call the Republican Party Putin's GOP. Of all the tremendous accomplishments of the first 100 days of the second Trump administration, the one thing that he has not achieved is peace in Ukraine in a day. And so Vladimir Putin. You had to sit across the table from him. He has a particular affection for you. What's happening there from your assessment? I mean, really, with your keen understanding of them and the dynamics on the ground. And what do you think is the best possible outcome?
It's so interesting because it started off really grimly. I mean, the disgraceful way Trump and Vance treated Zelensky in the Oval Office. I'd never seen anything like that. Hope I never will again. And the kinds of positions that Trump was taking, which are right off of, Putin's wish list. I have this feeling that, because he wasn't able to resolve it quickly, like he said he was going to, and that he kept claiming that there would be, peace within days, and it would be a great peace deal, and he kept telegraphing, negotiating points. And this poor man, Steve Witkoff, who is, let's remember, the special envoy to Ukraine, the special envoy to the Middle East, and the special envoy to Iran.
So, as Secretary of State, could you just explain, I mean, if you're Marco Rubio, right, if you're the Secretary of State, you know something about the position, so what do you do with that? I mean, you actually had a special envoy to Pakistan and Afghanistan, so how does that work if you have a special envoy to all the other regions of the world that are important?
Well, you had special envoys and you had whole teams. Like, Witkoff showed up in the Kremlin last week without his own translator, which meant that he was totally dependent upon Putin's translator. I mean, you can't make this up. And so, and then he goes to, I mean, I was in a meeting the other day talking about the Iran negotiations, because I actually started the first Iran negotiations when we got global sanctions on Iran, which I still think is, the best way to deal with Iran. It's not just the United States. You have to get everybody on board, much harder now. And we were talking about, Rubio and Witkoff show up to negotiate with the Iranians over their nuclear program, and the Iranians sitting across the table are like nuclear physicists. They understand enrichment, the percentages that you get to that make it, weapon grades and all the rest of it. And you've got Marco Rubio and Witkoff and nobody else. I just don't understand. I mean, now he's moved his national security advisor, Mike Waltz, to the UN, and so now Rubio is both the Secretary of State and the national security advisor. The only other person who had that position, both of them, was Henry Kissinger. And somehow I don't see the parallels.
There's another topic that's on a lot of people's minds. Across the United States, families and individuals, some with legal status and some without legal status, but who are trying to sincerely navigate a very broken immigration system, are being detained, disappeared, deported without warning, without due process in many cases. Of course, this is focused on the most high-profile case, which is Kilmer Abrego Garcia, who the Supreme Court has, of course, weighed in and said that the Trump administration must facilitate his return from the terrorism confinement center, this maximum security prison in El Salvador, where he is being detained. How the term constitutional crisis has been lobbed around. There's a debate about when that happens. When is that moment? Between the separation of powers and whether the president is going to listen to the courts. How close do you think we are?
Well, I do think we are close, and I have been encouraged by the number of different judges who have been reaching the same conclusions. Just today, a Trump-appointed federal judge in Texas enjoined the Trump administration from using the Alien Enemies Act, which requires that you be able to say that you're facing an invasion in order to suspend due process, which is what they've tried to claim. And this judge said, no, what's happening is not in any way consistent with the law, and you are enjoined from using that as the basis for denying migrants and others of due process. So there now have been numerous judges, appointed literally by all the recent presidents, who have rendered decisions. We do have one 9-0 Supreme Court decision that facilitate the return decision. I think it will be very difficult for Trump and his advisors to continue to defy all these court orders, and eventually, based on the variety of the positions being taken, reaching the same conclusion, one or more will end up in the Supreme Court. And so the Supreme Court will, I hope, take more direct language to enforce its orders. And then I think, Trump, as I said earlier, you've got Democrats, obviously, but a big, now a significant majority of independents expressing disapproval of Trump. And you still have a lot of the Republicans hanging on to their support for him. But if the Supreme Court, with its very conservative majority, makes an order, that will break through to people. That will break through even to members of Congress who so far have either been silent or compliant. And it will break through to the more general public. And that's when we'll find out whether we have a constitutional crisis or not. And I'm obviously hoping that, the angels of their better nature prevail, and that they will not defy the Supreme Court, that they will not defy the order. What bothers me is you have a Justice Department which is supposed to be enforcing the law, not Trump's will, but the law, and they have shown under this new Attorney General very little interest in enforcing the law. So again, I have no idea what's going on behind closed doors amongst all of the, characters that are in Trump's administration, the justices on the Supreme Court, all the intermediaries who are part of the, the rights apparatus. But even they, I think, have to be extremely worried about crossing over into a constitutional crisis where the Supreme Court makes an order, where even a federal court issues a nationwide injunction, and then they ignore it. So we'll see. I mean, Mr. Abrego Garcia is still in that prison, although I guess they moved him out of the worst prison into the second worst prison to claim that they were, trying to keep him safe. But you have a very serious problem with the idea of sending anybody to foreign prisons. And now they're going to be sending people to Rwanda and to a couple of other countries that have said that they would take migrants. But you also have Trump in the Oval Office, which is why I say, listen to him, saying, we can send some of our homegrown people, by which he means, I think, citizens.
To that end, I mean, perhaps it is the case that Senator Chris Von Holland was successful in his trip to El Salvador, but I noticed that the leadership in the House of Representatives on the Democratic side has now encouraged members to not go visit El Salvador, to not, is that a good idea? Or was it successful? Is it useful?
I think Chris Von Holland's trip was very useful. I think it was useful in part because he learned a number of things that helped to bolster the case against what Trump is doing with Bukele. He learned that this is a contract. This is, there's something called, the Foreign Immunities Act, where you can't sue sovereign states for their foreign policy decisions. That is not a foreign policy decision if you are receiving millions of dollars in a contractual relationship to provide a service to another country, in my opinion. So I think that and other things that Chris picked up are quite useful in the ongoing litigation that we're engaged in. I don't know if it would continue to be useful if it was just a steady stream of people showing up outside the prison, but Chris Von Holland's trip was very important.
It wouldn't be useful to have a series of Democrats going down. I mean, I think it strikes me that any attention down there continues to put the pressure on.
Well, I think that they ought to show up at the prisons in this country where people are being detained before they're even sent. And, a judge in Vermont just released one of the students from Columbia who had shown up at his appointed time for his interview with ICE in pursuit, I think, of a path toward citizenship. He has a green card. He's had it for years. And, his lawyers moved quickly to keep him from being sent from Vermont to Louisiana. But you have a lot of the migrants who are in Louisiana prisons right now, and the judges there are much more sympathetic to the arguments being made by Trump and ICE. So I think we need to put, a lot more light on what's going on in those cases. But if this, this judge in Texas who issued this injunction, and there's another order preventing any further, deportation, flying any of these, immigrants out of the United States to wherever, those cases will probably be appealed and will end up in the court relatively soon, and so I think that's what we have to be focused on.
You mentioned Columbia. Columbia appears in your book because you're on the staff now. You're a professor at the School for International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. Those chapters are really focused on human rights and these leaders, particularly female leaders, from Maria Ressa, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, who's the journalist from the Philippines, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya from Belarus, whose husband, the justly elected leader of Belarus, has been imprisoned now for several years. Talk about Colombia, and then, it's hard to avoid the fact that the president has had an outright attack against our institutions, universities chief among them. Columbia has been in the crosshairs from the beginning, as has Harvard and many other universities. So maybe first, your relationship with Columbia and what you're doing there, and then this broader attack against universities.
Yeah, well, I have been a professor of practice at the School of International and Public Affairs now for, I think, 3+ years, and I teach a a course with the dean, who has appeared on this stage, Karen Yarhi-Milo, and we teach a course called Inside the Situation Room about crisis decision-making, and there we were in the middle of a crisis post-October 7th because of everything that you all know started happening with protests and encampments and other activities on the Columbia campus. And, you know, obviously it was a very difficult time for any of us who were there trying to figure out how to continue to teach, how to continue to engage with students, to try to create an environment in which you could actually have conversations. And I have to say, the vast majority of students that I dealt with were absolutely receptive to that. We have a huge class we teach. It's 350 students, about a quarter undergraduates, the rest graduate, mostly from SEPA, but the law school, journalism school, other parts of the Columbia University community. And our class was still a very productive place for people to engage in asking hard questions, raising a lot of the difficult issues that were on their minds. And it was hard. The university had some difficulty trying to figure out how to deal with what was going on. We all know and saw that. But I think Trump's attack on universities and the stripping away of research funding and other federal funding is a part of a much bigger assault on higher education. And Columbia has, you know, made a lot of changes. I understand it from what I hear coming out of the...
Are you seeing any of them?
Yeah, they have been working hard to, you know, change some of the rules governing what is speech, what isn't speech, what's appropriate, and I think that needed to be done. And so they were in the process, as I was made aware, of trying to accomplish that. But I think that we've got to really separate out the specific concerns, which I shared, about interrupting classes, interrupting events, vandalism, taking over buildings. That's not free speech, and that needed to be stopped as quickly as possible and consequences expected. But what does that have to do with ripping away research grants about Alzheimer's? I mean, I think that there's something bigger going on in the back of Trump and his advisors. They want to really chill the environment at universities. And I thought Harvard, to be fair, has handled it extremely well. I mean, they've said, look, we made mistakes, we know we did, and we've got to figure out how to deal with them. But we're not going to let you come in as the government and make those changes. We're going to do them, and we're going to do them appropriately, and we're going to fight you on taking away research funding.
How about the attack against the law firms and the also the press, right? I mean, it's not just one institution. I mean, there are many institutions that are absolutely in the crosshairs. I don't know, pick one. Media, I mean, you have, I mean, you know, President Trump, of course, is suing 60 Minutes. It seems that Paramount has paved the way for a settlement. ABC has settled with the Trump administration. Meta settled with the Trump administration and actually organized for $20 million to be directed to President Trump's presidential library. The Des Moines Register and Gannett came under threat, and actually the judge fortunately threw that out. So there's the tax on the media, which I know you actually write about in the book, especially with respect to international media and media freedom abroad. But do we have a threat to media freedom domestically now?
Absolutely. And look, I think if you read any history of how authoritarians take over societies, remember, in many instances, these authoritarians came to power legitimately, and then who did they go after? They went after higher education. They went after the press. They went after any element of the opposition. And what he has done with law firms, in particularly, the first case that went after Perkins Coie, why did he go after Perkins Coie? Because they'd been my lawyers in 2016. And then the firm that is my personal firm, they were my, you know, campaign firm. My personal firm, Jenner and Block, to their great credit, you know, defended Perkins Coie. Why did they go after Williams and Connolly? I mean, Williams and Connolly is my personal firm. They are defending Perkins Coie. Jenner and Block was then next in the crosshairs. Why did he go after them? Because Andrew Weissman had been a partner. Andrew Weissman was one of Bob Mueller's top aides. And, so they also got a great defense from another firm, the Cooley firm. And then finally, Wilmer and Hale is being defended by a lawyer named Paul Clement, who's a very conservative lawyer, had been the Solicitor General under George W. Bush. And I am a recovering lawyer, and I would only say this simply because it really made me feel so proud. I've read all the briefs that these law firms have filed on behalf of their law firm clients, the ones that didn't fold, that didn't give in, and you read it, and it is like a primer on the First Amendment and the Fifth Amendment and the Sixth Amendment and the separation of powers and all the rest of it. And there's the beginning paragraph in the brief on behalf of Wilmer Hale, filed by this very conservative lawyer named Paul Clement, says something like, lawyers are the defenders of the rule of law, which means that lawyers often have clients that are not popular. And this goes back to the very beginning of our country, because John Adams defended 8 of the British soldiers that were charged in the Boston Massacre. And you read that and you go, wow. Now, if these justices who claim to be originalists read that, what are they going to say? Well, we're going to disagree with John Adams. So I think that the fight back that we're seeing on the law firms, on the universities, is so critically important. And just as an aside, even I, with all my worry about this Supreme Court, cannot see them overturning these decisions that are all going against the government. So I think at some point there will be decisions that the Trump administration had no legal basis for executive orders trying to strip these firms of their ability to go to federal court to represent clients in federal agencies. And when that happens, then all the rest of these firms, which made their deals, they can regain some of their honor by saying, those were coerced agreements and we no longer honor them. And so maybe that's where we'll end up, but let's hope.
I'm going to go to audience questions, so if you have questions, please get them to the appropriate receptacle or vehicle. But there's one, I was pulling up my Instagram because of a post that you just posted the other day, and it dovetails perfectly with an audience question, which is, what advice do you have for women who feel overwhelmed by our current political system? And it reminded me of this post that you had the other day about reproductive rights, which you write about in your book. And what the Trump administration, you said, the Trump administration wants to give you a medal for having 6 kids, but here's where their concern is for children and parents ends. And then it sort of goes through what they're doing to the budget with respect to families, earned income family tax, child credit. What inspiration or what advice do you have for women who feel overwhelmed by the current political system?
You are not alone. Everybody's feeling overwhelmed. And, the attack on women's roles, women's rights, is very much part of this administration's agenda. We saw it, the first person that Trump actually had fired was the woman commandant of the Coast Guard. The second person he had fired was the chair of the Joint Chiefs, a very distinguished African-American Air Force general with a lot of combat flying experience. And the third person was the first woman to become the chief of naval operations. And so it has continued. There has been a real purging of women and women in high positions in the military and in civilian roles. But there's more to that. There's also this, as I posted the other day, this very blatant effort to basically send a message, most exemplified by Vance and Musk and others, that, what we really need from you women are more children. And what that really means is you should go back to doing what you were born to do, which is to produce more children. And they are talking about, cash benefits for the more children you have. This has been tried, by the way, in other countries, and it has not worked. Or medals if you have 6 children, while they're contemplating cutting Medicaid, while they have no interest in paid family leave or funding quality child care. They're cutting Head Start. I mean, you go down the list of all the programs that support child rearing and the care of children and create, some safety net for women who are in the workforce, the formal workforce, as well as, raising children. So this is another performance about concerns they allegedly have for family life. But if you had read the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, despite Trump saying he knew nothing about it, if you had read it, it's all in there. It's all in there. Return to the family, the nuclear family, return to being a Christian nation, return to, producing a lot of children, which is sort of odd because the people who produce the most children in our country are immigrants, and they want to deport them. So none of this adds up. But, one of the reasons why our economy did so much better than comparable advanced economies across the world is because we actually had a replenishment, because we had a lot of immigrants, legally and undocumented, who had a, larger than normal, by American standards, family. So this is just another one of their, make America great again by returning to the lifestyles and the economic arrangements of not just the 1950s. I mean, let's keep going back as far as we can and, see what happens. So I find it all to be, there will be great plays written about this and great, just wait. I hope somebody out there is working on it because, the absurdity of this, we will sit in the audience and we will go, what? They said what? They did what? So we just have to keep speaking out against it. I'm all for more children, and wouldn't it be nice if we actually had a society and a government and a political system that actually valued children and families and that actually, provided support for families and living wages and affordable housing and quality affordable child care, all of that. It would be great. I'm for that. That's not their agenda.
Since you mentioned plays, fun question from the audience. What have you seen on Broadway lately?
Well, I just saw Maybe Happy Ending, which I loved. I loved it. I knew nothing really about it. Some, friends wanted to go, and I went, and it was so touching to me. I mean, I'm not going to do any spoilers, but it sort of is a relationship love story between robots, which sounds weird, but it's really...
Sorry, between what?
Robots.
Robots.
Robots. But it's really wonderful.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, well, you have to go see it.
Okay, great. Got to do my research. Another fun one. What advice do you have for the first female president of the United States?
Well, first of all, don't be a handmaiden to the patriarchy, which kind of eliminates every woman on the other side of the aisle, except for very few.
Lisa Murkowski. Liz Cheney.
Yeah, there's a few. Look, first we have to get there, and it is, obviously so much harder than it should be. If a woman runs who I think would be a good president, as I thought Kamala Harris would be, and as I knew I would be, I will support that woman.
So, Democrats, it strikes me, are really struggling with how to respond in this moment. There is no uniform messaging. There is, my perception is it's somewhat catatonic. And you have these very different reactions. So there's one woman in politics, Gretchen Whitmer, who has faced enormous backlash for appearing to be working with Trump to save a military base in Michigan, speaking on stage with him at a 100-day rally. You have Governor Wes Moore, who seemed to be a person of great promise for the future of the Democratic Party, who just said on The View definitively he is not running for president. What should people are already thinking about what the next generation looks like, but what should Democrats be doing now?
Well, first of all, I think Gretchen Whitmer did her job. She was trying to save a military base's mission. And look, I know it's complicated. I've been there. I mean, when I was in the Senate, I worked with every Republican on something. And, it wasn't always easy, but I felt like my first obligation was to produce, positive outcomes for the people I represented here in New York. And that's sometimes meant working with people who one day would say I was the devil incarnate and the next day would be co-sponsoring a bill with me. And so you just have to try to keep your focus on what is it you're trying to accomplish. And as I understand it, that is exactly what she did. And whether, people liked it or not, she got the result that she wanted for her state, which, involved a lot of jobs and economic activity. So, look, I don't think anybody who is running yet in 2027 either has actually made up his or her mind or wants to tell you if they have. So they're all trying out different approaches. They're trying, to try out different messaging, making different speeches. J.B. Pritzker made a tremendously combative and strong speech up in New Hampshire the other day. Gavin Newsom is doing podcasts trying to see how do you deal with this manosphere, which is incredibly important if you're trying to figure out how to get young men back, for example, to vote for Democrats. Well, how do you talk to them? I mean, everybody's experimenting. Pete Buttigieg is going to Iowa. I mean, everybody is sort of out there trying to get the touch and the feel, like what is actually happening in the country. And are the things that Trump is doing, which is now dropping his approval rating, really registering with people? And how do you win an election? Because, the calculations about how you put together those electoral college votes is very hard. And so I think that there is going to be a lot of testing of the waters, but we won't know really who decides to run until probably after the midterms, which really underscores the most important message. We have to win the midterms. We have to take back the House and see what we can do in the Senate. If we take back the House in 2026, we finally have the venue, the authority, the opportunity to do what must be done to rein them in. And so to me, that is by far the most important thing, although winning the governorships in New Jersey and Virginia, which are up this year, is also very important. At the end of the day, we will defeat these people by winning elections. I mean, even if we win every court case, we still have to figure out how to get that enforced. Even if the press does lots of exposés, you're dealing with an administration that has no shame. They don't care that they are, being seen as corrupt or cruel or whatever. That is kind of the brand. So we have to win elections, and that can only happen by putting forth candidates and having strong campaigns that can break through and using all of the incredible ammunition we're getting because of the decisions they're making to basically ask people, are you better off now than you were? Is this what you voted for? Did you vote for tariffs that are going to make everything more expensive? Is that what you voted for? Did you vote for stripping people of the due process that is enshrined in the Constitution? Did you vote for doing away with all foreign aid so that we're no longer trying to stop epidemics that come from other parts of the world or even know that they're on their way? Did you vote for that? And most people are going to say, well, no, I didn't vote for that. I voted to get my egg prices down or whatever they voted for. And so I think we have a great opportunity, but that's what I'm staying focused on.
I think people will be touched if they haven't read the book already to read how intimate you are about your family, your grandchildren, your girlfriends, and we have watched your life up close on television for 30, 40 years, it seems, and you really kind of help people look behind the curtain to see how you sustained yourself even in the most difficult moments. Your girlfriends are a huge part of that. It's kind of amazing to me for how well you are known, how little known some of the friends that you write about in this book are, that you really have these very deep, intimate, it's not a surprise you have deep, intimate, important relationships, but like really meaningful ones that are, talk about your girlfriends and how they've sustained you spiritually.
You know, I really, when I was writing this book, you know, my publisher said, you know, sort of write a book like you were at a dinner party talking to people, you know, about your life and what was important to you. And I started thinking, obviously, my family, my faith, my work, but my friends. My friends have been such a big part of my life, and I am so fortunate to have friends that I still am in touch with all the time from literally every stage of my life, going back to elementary school and all the way through. And I just don't know what it would have meant for my life if I had not had this extraordinary group of friends from all stages here in New York, all the way back to growing up outside of Chicago, who, you know, show up for me, or maybe I don't even see them that regularly, but it's always wonderful when I do. And I just think talking about what friendship meant to me was very much a part of the story I wanted to tell, because yes, people see the public persona, they see me in the arena, but they don't see me when, you know, I go out to dinner with my friends or go on vacation with them, or, you know, are there for them when they lose somebody that they love, or are there for their family when we lose them. You know, yesterday would have been the 78th birthday of my best friend from childhood, a woman named Betsy, who I write about. And one of her daughters started a charity in memory of her mother. And it's every time you went to Betsy's house or you traveled with Betsy, she'd always say, are you warm enough? I don't know why, but that was like her deal. Are you warm enough? And, you know, whether you would say you were or not, she'd always like hand you a blanket. And so her daughter, Haley, started this charity called Betsy's Blankets. And what they do, you know, they're in the Chicago area, is they provide air mattresses, they provide bedding, they provide blankets to homeless shelters, to domestic abuse shelters, to, you know, families that are burned out of houses, they don't have anything. And, you know, they've just been an incredibly wonderful mission to try to both honor her mother, my friend, by helping other people. I just find that, you know, when all the rest of the world is going crazy, you know, think about people you love, you care about, that are important to you. Think about the lives they've led, what they've tried to do to help people, the kindness that they have tried to convey, and then passing it on to the next generation, like what, you know, Betsy's daughter is doing in her name. So I wanted to share that, and I feel, you know, very, very fortunate to have that kind of support system, because, you know, I've been through a few things, and it's nice to be able to kind of have people around that care about you.
Actually, you just reminded you know, you've been through a few things, and you've, you know, it reminds me of something my great-grandfather used to say. He lived till he was 90. He was the oldest living post-president. And they said, well, how did you live to see your reputation recovered? He said, well, I outlived the bastards. Yeah. Sort of, right, you know, you have outlived them, but they're still going at it. You know, you were mentioned from the White House press secretary's podium yesterday in the briefing. One of the conservative influencer reporters asked about prosecuting President Obama and you for, quote, any of the wrongdoings they might have done. So the press secretary responded by talking about election integrity and how President Trump has really been the strongest proponent for free and fair elections. And then a follow-up question specifically asked to make sure, because his audience wanted to make sure that Hillary, quote, is not just getting off scot-free after knowing what, it was not grammatically correct, this is a direct quote, not getting off scot-free after knowing what her and the DNC did leading up to the 2020 election, and then he cited Hurricane Crossfire and the Steele dossier, which of course was the 2016 election, but whatever. So she responded by saying, well, this is a really great question. And I absolutely understand and agree with what you're asking, but I would want to let the president weigh in on that front. So then she's opened up the door for the president to now weigh in. It's never going to stop. And one of these questions is about how we regulate social media, and how that combines with AI. The audience question says, I fear this will continue to misinform and skew election outcomes.
Well, let me answer the first part, but the second part is the most important. When I practiced law many, many years ago, there was this old saying that was, if the law's not on your side, emphasize the facts. And if the facts aren't on your side, emphasize the law. And if neither are on your side, pound on the table. And I actually tried some cases in Arkansas way back when where literally that's what the other side did, was pound on the table. And every time I hear something like that, I think, I'm back in a courtroom in, somewhere in Arkansas. They're pounding on the table because they have neither the facts nor the law. And this is their mindset. And, they just can't help themselves because he's on a retribution tour. I mean, there may be jackets, like when you go on tour like Beyonce or Taylor Swift, the Eras tour, the Cowboy Carter tour, well, the Retribution tour. And that is really, at the end of the day, all they've got is trying to, get even with people they think did them wrong. Luckily, there isn't any wrong, but that doesn't stop them. And we will see how they've gone after people like Tony Fauci and General Milley and other people who have served our country with great distinction. So I'm not surprised. But the more important question is, how do they get away with it? I mean, how do they say these things that are so blatantly false? How do they claim an election was, rigged against them? They had no evidence. Every bit of evidence they thought they had that they tried to present was rejected by more than 60 courts. They had no case, but they kept pounding the table, and they kept making the claim. And they were able, through the big lie technique, and also their allies, primarily in social media, but also on Fox and other outlets, to perpetuate this lie. And, Hannah Arendt and others who've studied totalitarianism obviously focused on, the Nazis, and Hitler and Stalin and communism and everything historically that they tried to understand, made a couple of points that I think are critically important for us to reflect on now. The big lie is an old technique that has now been amplified because of social media. It's not passing out pamphlets on the street corners. It's not using the radio in Rwanda to convince the Hutus to massacre the Tutsis. It's not using the radio and the newspaper in Bosnia to convince the Serbs to turn on their Croatian and Bosniak neighbors. It's all that plus, plus, plus. Because what has been unleashed on social media is a totally unaccountable fire hose of falsehoods that unfortunately are believed by way too many people. I saw that for the first time in my 2016 campaign. I had never seen really anything like it. I mean, all of a sudden I'm, imprisoning children in the basement of a pizzeria and things like that. I mean, people believed that. They still believe that. And when you ask them why, they often said, because I saw it on the internet. And as it's gotten more and more obvious that the companies that own these platforms are not going to take any responsibility for the content which appears on them, that just opens the door to so much abuse. And what I now am very worried about is the role that AI will play in furthering that abuse. I mean, it's one thing if, we worry that AI, because it's gobbled up all of the information that's already out there, it's going to have biases because the information, which comes from human beings, has biases. But if the algorithms, as they are now on social media platforms, are used within AI to promote the biases, then, somebody writing a term paper who tunes into Joe Rogan to see a debate about whether Churchill was the aggressor in World War II, then goes to AI, and AI has picked that up, and so AI says, well, some people say Churchill was the aggressor, or now because Donald Trump and his, spokespeople are on the record saying that, Putin didn't really invade Ukraine, then you go to AI, and AI says, well, people say Putin did not invade Ukraine. As Hannah Arendt said, that, the big lie was not always to convince you to believe that lie. It was to throw up so much confusion you no longer believed anything. And we're now, some historians, philosophers, others say we're in a post-truth world. What does that mean?
Well, you can get truth by going to his social media platform.
You can go to
for Truth Social.
You go to social media, and that's where you get your truth. And apparently, that's where a lot of people get their truth.
Yeah, that's where they get their truth. One more serious question, and then a fun one to end. You mentioned, the big lie. You mentioned the chatbots. I mean, the chatbots at one point, leading up to this election, actually, if you asked it who won the 2020 election, they said, well, it was sort of disputed and it wasn't clear. Like they wouldn't, they got called out on it. Sam Altman fixed it, and then eventually it said Biden won the 2020 election. But it took a minute. Given that President Trump did grant clemency to all of the rioters who are charged in the January 6th riot against the Capitol, how worried are you that he'll try it again?
Well,
maybe not a riot, but, they're all joking about a third term.
Yeah, you are absolutely right about that, Margaret. Like I said in the very beginning, listen to what Trump says. He telegraphs everything, and often when he's criticizing something, he's criticizing them for what he's already done or intends to do. And so you have to, I have a friend who was involved in a debate about the economic policy the first 100 years, and she said that, they went back and forth on what was happening with the economy, and she finally said, really, I think you need psychologists and psychiatrists up here, because what we're dealing with is a mindset that is so hard to understand. And when he says, and there are people who think that it could happen, what he's saying is he has people right now in these right-wing think tanks trying to figure out how to make it happen. And he also has very militant supporters who believe that it should happen. So if it can't happen legally, that is not an obstacle.
Well, they'll get pardoned.
Yeah, they're going to they are going to try to figure out how he can have another term.
So this is something you think we should take
deadly seriously? I don't either.
You think we should take it seriously? Just Cassie. We're back to Cassie.
I think you have to take all of it seriously, and the best response might be for Barack and Bill to run too, and. Okay, take your choice. Who do you want for a third term, people? If this is where we're heading, we're going to break the Constitution, give people a choice. This is so nuts. I feel embarrassed talking about it, but I think you have to face up to it. They are going to try. They are going to try to do that. Don't you think?
How do we not take seriously what has already happened once?
Yeah, and you raised the point about the, the rioters. The insurrectionists, I like to call them, they have now been granted clemency, and there is a move to grant them reparations. I've heard that come out of the mouth of people in the White House and associated with the Justice Department, because these poor people, they had to hire lawyers. They might have lost business because, you know, they were in prison. So they should be compensated for trying to illegally, violently overturn an election and a government. So there is very little self-restraint, and the thing I know we're getting toward the end, I just want everybody to think of the ways that each of you can play a role in standing up against this, you know, very dangerous administration. And there are lots of ways that we can do it. Number one, please vote every time there's a chance to vote. You've got to vote. I mean, I know that, you know, people think, oh, that's not, you know, that's not, there must be something else I can do. Well, there are other things, but please, you've got to do that. You also have to show up at town halls, you know, show up to support people who are trying to defend our Constitution, defend the rule of law, defend due process, defend programs like Medicaid and Social Security that millions of Americans and New Yorkers depend upon. Show up and support the people trying to do that, and show up and question and criticize the people who are, you know, not. Like every Republican member of Congress, and we have some in this state, they're dodging town halls, and people should be, you know, demanding that they talk to their constituents and then showing up to ask them hard questions. As I said, the midterm elections, if you're from New Jersey, please vote in, you know, these upcoming governor's elections. I mean, there are things that will send strong messages and also change the balance of power that we have to try to do. And support, you know, I just saw where Microsoft moved some business away from one of the firms that gave in to Williams and Conley. They moved some, you know, business, and other firms are moving to Jenner and Block and all that. If you have decision-making authority about who your lawyers should be, go with lawyers who stood up for the Constitution, for example.
Secretary Clinton, I think it's been everybody's great privilege to be able to be here with you and to be able to hear you talk about your book and also hear you in this moment. So thank you for joining us here at the 97th.
Thank you all very much.